Lord Falmouth, I think that probably has to be joint number one favourite with Burgundy Wedding Train.
That's very smart.
I think that's my favourite coleus of all time. I
It
absolutely
is
adore it.
gorgeous. And you can just see it here, but you get the odd stem that has much more of a lemon splash. It has a very nice habit. This very similar to Lord Falmouth in that it does sort of drape quite nicely, and then where it drapes, it sends up shoots so that you don't end up with all these sort of bare legs.
Hello and welcome to a special episode of Talking Dirty, focusing on the October stars at East Ruston Old Vicarage. Over at aforementioned garden, we have Alan Edward Herbert Gray, our very happy and ever more handsome horticulturalist.
Oh dear, you flatter me, wench, you flatter me. Well, today we have what I think is the beginning of a breakdown of the heat wave, because we've got kind of cloudy days. I don't know what you got over there, but you look absolutely beaming, Thordis Maria Sophia Fredrickson, and well, blossoming, and a new mum. How are you?
Yeah, I've had no sleep for a long time. And if you hear the dog crying, it's because Daddy and Baby are out for a walk so that we have hopefully blessed peace, but probably not with the dog. We may have a few connection issues over the course of this podcast, but we're going to persevere because windows of opportunity to talk about plants are few and far between these days. So if one of us freezes for a moment or two, we apologize.
Actually, I just got a little notice on my screen saying that I'm unstable, but we knew that anyway.
You're unstable. Well, I'm amazed it's you rather than me, to be honest. So
yeah.
we're going to carry on because we've spent a long time writing down many plants that we want to talk about and taking photos. I haven't been to your garden for probably the longest time in my living memory.
I know.
And I miss it so terribly. So to look through all of these photos and just get a tiny sense of how glorious it is looking at the moment. And I've had reports from all of our gardening friends of how absolutely at its peak it is right now. It must have been quite hard actually to pick out some kind of planty favourites when the whole supporting cast, all of the combinations, you kind of get blown away with every few yards.
Yes, it is, I suppose, really. But I took myself off yesterday afternoon and I did a little walk and I took a few snaps. I think I took about 45, 50 snaps of various plants in the garden, because I think it's nice to get a close-up of the plant that we're talking about so that people can see it in its, rather than like an amorphous mass in the distance, you see the flower close up so you know what we're talking about. And I did that and I just kept going, oh, look at that, and so on and so forth. So it was remarkable. And, I suddenly thought I should probably do this at least once a week. I know from here on in probably the numbers are going to go down. Excuse me. But I do think it's important to do that in actual fact, because it clicks your brain into gear and stops you worrying about whatever you were doing, which incidentally was taking cuttings. I've been taking hundreds and hundreds of cuttings. Lots of the plants that we're going to see today, I've been taking cuttings of. I go out with my bag to put the cuttings in, and I have a little bit of moisture in the bottom of the bag to keep the atmosphere buoyant while we're gathering cuttings. And I suddenly go past a plant and I think, oh, well, let's do a try of that. I haven't done it before. And it was Hardenbergia violacea. It is an Australian climber that blooms in late winter or early spring under glass in this country. I have grown it outside and it has come through the winter, but of course it didn't come through last winter. So I thought, well, I've only got one fairly big plant and I could risk putting it outside, but if I lose it, then I've lost it. So I thought, well, I'll do a tray of cuttings and just see. And if I get 4 or 5 cuttings that root from that 12 that I did, then I can sort of chance my arm and try it in a few places outside.
Is it easy to root from cuttings?
I don't know. I've never done it.
You're going to find out.
Yeah, you do. In actual fact, and that's one of the great things of being experimental, because, you've got to experiment and try these things, because it might not come from cutting in a conventional way. It might need probably air layering or something like that. I don't know. I haven't done it. So we'll see. I mean, I'll give it a go this year and see what happens. I'll keep my old plant under glass, so I've still got it. And it will bloom for me just after Christmas next year. It has racemes of little purple pea-shaped flowers. I don't think we'll probably be able to find a photograph of it, although you never know.
Well, you never do. There may be one lurking in our back catalogue. There are many, many plants we've talked about over the years, and that's one. I really struggle to remember the name of it because I've never grown it because I don't have the protection, but I covet it every single year, a proper FLOMO plant at East Ruston Old Vicarage.
I think it's a member of the pea family, so it could be relatively easy from cuttings, but the nodes between each stem, the nodes are fairly far apart, it's thin and very wiry, which to me doesn't say cuttings root easily, but you never know.
With your plant list that we've put together, the things we would ideally like to talk about, whether or not we'll have time to talk about all of these is another thing, but there are so many plants that I see year in, year out in your garden. And I mean, some of it's just not attainable. Things like your Dahlia border, that kind of long border, the long walk, which is just absolutely packed out. This was the photo I think you sent me that really made me go, I'm desperate to come for a walk along that part of your garden and see, because photos just can't quite do it justice. Oranges and pinks and salmons, and then lovely chocolates, possibly Dahlia Sam Hopkins, I'm not sure, it looked a bit like it. All these really boisterous, ebullient plants. I can't even imagine how many make up that long border, and it's looking possibly better than ever.
I don't know. It's very strange, because last winter, as we all know, was quite a cruel winter, and we didn't take any of those dahlias up from 2022. So they are 2022. They were planted, and they've come through the winter of 22-23, and they were late into growth. And I thought, well, is it worth leaving them or not? And I did, and I'm jolly pleased that I did. But you mentioned that dahlia border. Now, that dahlia border, I think, is lovely. I love it. Incidentally, when I say things like this, please bear in mind that Graham and I garden to suit ourselves. It's nice that other people like it. And when I say I think it's looking good, it means that really it pleases me. I don't mean to be showing off about it. It's nice that people like what we like, but that's the reason behind it, not showy offy. But I don't like monoculture, so there is not just dahlias in that border. First of all, there's the wonderful backing of all the lovely climbers on the back, and taller plants in front of those get integrated into this border, like Ricinus, castor oil plant with big bronze leaves, the odd red leaf banana, which grows enormous with these huge paddle-shaped leaves. And at this time of the year, as the sun gets lower, the sun shines through the leaves, giving that lovely translucent effect. And I mean, it is stunning. The other plant that I must talk about there is the huge Eucomis, and it's Eucomis pallida, in brackets, pole-evansii. And I do a little tale about pole-evansii because there was a lady that came to my garden and she said, I bet you haven't got this in your garden. I said, what's that? She showed me a picture and she said, it's called Eucomis Paul Evans 2.
I'm not laughing in a way like really at her, because I have pronounced plants in all kinds of weird and wonderful ways.
We all have.
But that is a good one.
Yeah, it is a good one. Anyway, I was thinking about pole-evansii or Eucomis pallida, call it what you will. If you go to buy a bulb of those, they're probably about £20 per bulb today, which is a lot of money. I saw you wince. In fact, I felt you wince 60 miles away, and I feel you wince for me. And so we're going to try this next year to root it, and I've researched into how you root it. And in June, you take a leaf and you cut the leaf into chevron-shaped segments, and you let them dry a little, and then you put them in some perlite and keep them warm and keep them moist. And hopefully they make little seed pearls along the bottom of the leaf cuts. And there's your tiny little bulbils. And it probably takes you 5 or 6 years maybe to grow them on to get flowers, but it's better than paying £20 a bulb, I think. And it's interesting because you can just do it and forget it. If you plant them out somewhere, they're quite strong growing plants. And one thing I would say, and I got this from Avon Bulbs, the lovely late Alan Street told me that it's one of those bulbs you really want to plant deep, not just because it comes from South Africa, which could mean that it's on the verge of, a little bit tender, but because it's such a strong growing, tall, heavy flower spike, if you plant it deep, it anchors it into the soil better and there's less chance of it blowing over. And I have to say, it works.
Yes. What a great tip. They are wonderful plants. Every year I covet your Eucomis. I don't have any, perhaps remiss of me, but that one, I didn't know the name of it. So another plant I don't think we've ever talked about on Talking Dirty. I get the feeling there could be a few of those over,
yeah, there are.
over the course of this. And actually,
well, I mean, they range in size from from very small to very, but I was just thinking, actual fact, there's a chap at Panache Plants called Richard, and he has the National Collection. Maybe we should talk to him.
Yes, we should. Now there's a thought.
He's very nice and very handsome.
He is. Both.
He's eye candy, honey. Get him on.
And you mentioned the Ricinus. Again, another plant, which, I mean, did you start those from seed? Have they been overwintered?
My criteria for growing them is saving my own seed and buying in seed, because you can never be quite sure whether Ricinus seed is viable or not. It might produce a seed, but is that seed viable? Has it got an embryo in it? Will it grow for you? Who knows? I don't know. But the amazing thing is that, again, it's a plant that completely surprises you, because in the border opposite my potting shed, I looked down earlier this year, probably in about May, I suppose, and there were Ricinus self-sown seedlings germinating. And I thought, all the trouble I go to, the damn thing self-sown puts itself there, you know. But yeah, and no, we do actually. And if you want to keep the varieties separate, because if you grow more than one, there's every chance that they'll cross-pollinate, and then you might get something absolutely wonderful. You might not. There's a lovely one that came from Steve Edney that we grew called New Buddha, and that had a lovely glaucous cast to the leaf. But one of my favourites is an old trusted one. It's called Carmencita, and it's a flamboyant thing, and it serves its purpose. It's wonderful. I love it.
It's a great name and a wonderful plant. It's amazing. It's one of those things where you cannot believe the growth in one season.
Exactly. There's two plants that do that. They're very easy, both from seed and both relatively inexpensive. You know how I hate the word cheap. There's Ricinus. So you buy a packet of seed and you can grow Ricinus on your kitchen windowsill or somewhere like that. But do give them as much light as possible. And the other one is you don't need to sow them inside. It's Persicaria orientalis, which has the lovely, lovely common name that Kiss Me Over the Garden Gate. I've grown those in pots this year. I mean, when I say pots, it's a big pot. It's 2 feet across and 2 feet deep. And I put 4 or 5 plants in that pot, and they're now about 9 feet tall. I have a peninsula in the garden here, which we fill full of pots, where people sit and have lunch and afternoon tea and all the rest of it. And that is the centerpiece of this peninsula. And I was going to scrap it the other day because its bottom leaves have all gone dead and they looked awful and everything. And so I just thought, well, before I take it away, let's remove them. It was like giving it a facelift. I mean, the removal of detritus, dirty leaves, dead leaves and things like that, it really does freshen a plant up. And so it's still there, and it's still 9 feet tall. And all you have to do with that, once you've grown it, is you just run your hand along the tassel of seeds, of flowers, I mean, and in amongst the flowers, there'll be seeds, and you take them out, dry them, and in the middle of all that detritus, once you've dried it, there's little black seeds, and they're what you want to sow. And you sow them, put them outside in April or May, something like that. But I start mine in April. I sow them in a seed tray. I put a layer of gravel on the top and I wait, and up they pop.
Wonderful. You sent a few photos of that Persicaria, but the island peninsula you plant them on, where everybody, if you've been to East Ruston, where you all sit in that lovely sunny, it's funny to think how it's changed actually, that sort of sunny sheltered bit where you built an extra wall to help make it really snug and enclosed and more planting kind of opportunities. You often showcase your seed grown dahlias in there, and I don't know if you're doing that this year, but you often have a few wonderful East Ruston specials. I
am, yes. Well, a lady came past the other day and she said, well, none of these dahlias have got labels on them. And she came up to me and she said it in that kind of way. No, the dahlias have got labels on them. And I said, well, madam, that's because they have yet to be named. Well, what do you mean? And I said, well, I've grown them from seed crosses that I've made in the garden here. And so until I give them a name, they don't have one. oh, well, you should name them and you should sell them because they're absolutely wonderful. And I thought, well, give us time, you know. It is amazing what you get from when you sow your self-sown seeds from your dahlias, because you, as well as getting an array of colours, an array of foliage, shapes and sizes and colours. And I love the dark leaf forms because they're different. And as well as that, it's the difference in height that you get. So you really need to grow them on for a couple of years so that you know their true characteristics. I mean, lots of them are very tall, they're 8 feet tall easily. Not everybody can accommodate that, but I would just say one thing. If you've got a small garden, remember the adage, if you're doing interior decorating, you've got a small room, one tall piece of furniture in a small room makes the room look bigger. And the same goes for your garden with a plant. And if you've got a tall dahlia, it will be quite airy at the top, so it won't be too dominating. But once you plant one tall thing, bet you'll plant more than one. There'll be more.
As my partner always says, I have a taste for stately home plants. That's what he calls them.
Well, he's quite right. You do.
Can't help it. Talking of dark-leaved dahlias, I grew one this year called Hadrian's Sunset. Yeah, Hadrian's Sunset. Really dark, quite filigree-ish foliage for a dahlia. Really nice. And flowers that are impossible to capture, which are kind of orangey, going more reddy in the centre, bit of a peachy thing going on. I mean, they're single, so wonderful for the pollinators. But that foliage, dark, really.
I've got a name. You should name that something else, like tropical sunset.
Yeah. Yeah.
Red, oranges, and pinks. Yeah.
Oh, and I'm thinking if I save the seed from that, I'll be really interested to see what comes out of it. I mean, it may just go kind of red, but dark leaves. I mean, the foliage is stunning. So I might just try like a row at the allotment of seed from that one. And it's next to Hadrian.
I was going to say, now that you've got an allotment, you can do that.
Exactly. I mean, that really
you can do that on your allotment. and the seedlings, there will be, I should think, probably 95% that will be also Arans. But it's that odd 5% that you grow that is special.
Hadrian's Midnight has a really sensational dark flower. Hadrian's Midnight is one I learned of from Dan Cooper, who we featured last week on the podcast. But Hadrian's Sunset, I was just lured in by pictures and the description on the website. And I'm so glad I grew it because its foliage is it's worth growing it for that alone. So we'll see. Of the also Rans, we'll see if one or two of them can be little stunners.
Well, absolutely. You know, I was talking about earlier in this podcast, taking cuttings. Well, one of the things it just lured me in to have a go with, there's various plants, perennial plants that behave in a peculiar way as they get towards the end of their summer and autumn life. And they produce little shoots, little adventitious shoots almost behind where the flowers have been. And one of them was Lysimachia clethroides, which is the swan neck loosestrife, which has those curving white spires of flowers, like white candles with a kink in them. And the other thing I noticed yesterday, and I'm going back to take the cuttings off it today, is the very tall growing Lobelia tupa. Now, Lobelia tupa sometimes sets seed and sometimes it doesn't. And I've got a red form that doesn't set seed. And it's an annoying thing to propagate because it has a rhizomatous sort of rootstock under the ground. And it's difficult. We do it, but it is difficult. But I noticed that just below the flowers, there's a series of young shoots coming out. And I thought, well, I'll try taking those and see what happens, because that'd be rather good if they root and if I can keep them through the winter. It'd be lovely.
Oh, yeah, fingers crossed. I mean, talking of red flowered, rather sensational things, every time I see what I think of as Zauschneria, but I think might have been renamed Epilobium, but Zauschneria or Epilobium canum, such a fabulous, just wherever you go. I was walking through the Botanic Garden here in Cambridge with a good friend of mine, and we were both just stopped in our tracks by it. One of those plants that you kind of can't walk past without just going, oh, that's lovely.
It's true, actually. There are several forms of it. There's a glaucous leaf form, and there's also a very dwarf form. I know the glaucous leaf form you used to be able to get from Berchato, and the dwarf form, I think, is grown by Potterton's nursery, who do a lovely range of alpines. And it's well worth getting if you have a small garden, or you've got a sink, or you've got a rockery. And, you know, today, probably, if we think of it, rockeries have become, it's a dirty word, isn't it? It's like crazy paving. Crazy paving is now alternative paving. Oh,
Yeah.
haven't we gone posh? And a rockery, a spree garden. I mean, it is funny, but wherever you can grow small plants, or if you've got a sink or a trough or a large raised bed or something, that little dwarf Zauschneria is lovely because it flowers late. And, you know, some of them run terribly. We've got them in the desert, and they run underneath the gravel and they pop up between the stones, which is lovely until you get to the stage where you think, well, there's too much of that. I've got to rip some of it out. But you never rip all of it out, so it will come back. But it's a nice, dare I say, a nice weed to have.
Yeah.
But it's an unusual thing, I think, that it flowers so late and it colours very well. It looks very, very good in the desert because near to it in the desert, in fact, very close to it, there's a Kniphofia, and it's one of the latest Kniphophias to flower. Well, in general terms, I mean, there are later ones, but they flower right into the winter. But when the days shorten, the colour changes. So instead of being orange, they become green. And to be quite honest, in the middle of winter, they're interesting rather than beautiful. But the Kniphofia that I'm referring to is called rooperi. And now rooperi, that's a very interesting Kniphofia. I'm going to save some seed from it this year. I know that it comes from seed because I've got 3 plants, all of which are slightly different. And they came from 3 separate sources. And I mean, what is not to like about a plant that you can plant it, you can leave it, you don't have to do anything to it. And 5 years later, it's sitting there and it's got 45 spikes of flower on it. Now, isn't that just absolutely wonderful? It blows you away. It really does, because you hadn't asked the plant to do this. If you planted Kniphofia rooperi and you got 5 or 10 flowers, you'd be thinking, "Wow, look at that! This is fantastic!" But just let it breathe, let it force its out, let it get a little bit more corpulent, and then suddenly, wow! There's a huge explosion of flowers comes out. Absolutely stunning.
The Zauschneria that you said was near that Kniphofia, one of the pictures you sent me, it was also near a very chocolatey leaved, a very dark leaved plant that I wasn't entirely sure what it was.
I think it's a chocolate leaved corokia. I'm pretty sure it is. It's in the Mediterranean garden, and it's got Amaryllis belladonna alba behind it. To the right, there's some Lobelia tupa. And you're absolutely right. There is Epilobium or Zauschneria in front. No, it's not. It's a pittosporum.
Oh, is it?
It's a little pittosporum called Tom Thumb.
Oh, it's Tom Thumb. Aha.
Yes, because can you see on the tips of the shoots to the right and on the top, there's little bits of green, and the new foliage always sprouts green, and then in the sun it goes bronze. So it's pittosporum Tom Thumb.
I mean, what a plant for contrast. I mean, going back to my Hadrian sunset and its dark foliage, that particularly to show up the Zauschneria flowers, I thought was marvellous.
Yeah.
And obviously next to the...
There are lots of plants that you can use that you don't have to have as a flowering plant. You know, the right kind, the right shape, the right colour, the right foliage is vital, because otherwise we'd see all these plain flowers on sticks, wouldn't we? No foliage at all. And foliage is so important.
And it's next to that Amaryllis, so you get the kind of black and white effect. And you sent me so many pictures of nerines and amarines, all floral fireworks in your garden at the moment.
Yeah. But they are doing so well this year because they had a baking in 2022, you see, because all of those bulbs, they like to be with their décolletage, you know, their sort of neck and shoulders, above ground level, so they get a basking. And that's very important to the success of their flowering. But having said that, I was thinking yesterday when I was taking some photographs of these nerines, and there's one particular nerine there, I don't know the name of it, it's quite a pale pink one, but it is flowering there it is, just above the Desfontainia. It's flowering in shade. And it reminds me of when I used to drive through Norwich years ago. There was a garden in Unthank Road in Norwich, very shady garden, and every autumn, they had this wonderful display of nerines growing in the shade. And I couldn't work it out. And I used to think, well, they don't grow in the shade. You know, they hoist themselves up. If you plant them deep, they hoist themselves up until the bulbs sit on the surface to get the baking and all the rest of it. But not just that. And I was reading something in a gardening periodical the other day, and the writer said, try nerines in shade. You'll be surprising how well they do. Not very deep shade, but a little bit of shade. So if you've got, woodland conditions, just try it and see what happens. Once you get enough bulbs, move a few over.
Haven't we heard something similar about Tulipa sprengeri? I'm sure Derry Watkins said that, you see it so often right out in full sun looking fabulous, places like the gravel garden at Beth Chatto's, but Derry's were self-seeding into a little bit of light shade and looking fabulous.
Yeah, you see, this is the thing with plants. They always catch you unawares. And somebody writes a book, an eminent gardener or a horticulturalist, call them what you will, they write a book and they say you can't grow this in this position. I mean, for instance, I remember in the RHS dictionary, they actually said, talking about communis, and they said you can't grow communis in dry soil. And I thought, watch me. And in those far off days when I had communis, I bought about 50 bulbs, I suppose. And our soil is a light, free draining, sandy loam. The water table is 19 feet down there. So it's a very dry soil. And people said to me, they won't do. I've got thousands of them, well, hundreds anyway, of them now in our wildflower meadow. So they've adapted. They like us. So plants are nothing if not adaptable. And they may do better in a wet soil, but I'm quite happy with what I've got.
And you also get the opposite occasionally is true. I'm sure I've heard you say that people always plant vincas, always plant periwinkles in a deep, dark, shady corner because they will cope well and perform well. But actually, if you give them some light, they can astound you by performing even better. It's just because they will cope, we always shove them into this difficult situation.
That is so true. That really is so true. I mean, I've got vincas, periwinkles growing all over the place in shade, and they oblige me wonderfully well in very early spring when they put forth their flowers and everything else in the shade. But if you grow them in sun, they are so much more floriferous and so much better. And the other plant that we always grow in shade is the climbing hydrangea, petiolaris. And that and the other thing as well is jasmine nudiflorum, the winter flowering jasmine. Both of those two plants, they flower much more profusely and prodigiously if you grow them with the sunshine on them. Take it a step further. You get to the question of roses. Which rose will grow in shade? Well, there are some that do better in shade than others, but basically they all do better in sunshine. And the same thing happens for clematis. Which clematis can I grow in the shade? Well, you can grow it, but don't expect to be fulfilled by it, because it will probably disappoint you, because although it will grow and it will produce the odd flower or two, it won't be, ebullient with it.
Yeah. I saw in your garden years ago, and finally got hold of a couple of years ago, Vinca major oxyloba, which has much sort of I think is the one that has much finer dark purple petals. It's very sort of starry, slightly less sort of chunky and lumpy than the average vinca you might think of, and it's very vigorous, but it's also very beautiful. So I just wanted to give a mention.
Are you trying to say that it has finesse?
It does. I think periwinkles, probably because they are a little bit municipal. You kind of see them in the shady corners of garden centre planting or car parks or whatever. You don't necessarily think vinca, ooh, but there are some lovely vincas, and certainly that one I'd wanted for years and I didn't even know what it was.
Two little bits of things that you can do to manipulate vincas is, plant them beneath a hedge bottom. If you've got a hedge bottom, and if say you've got a hedge at the end of your garden and the hedge bottom faces south but not into your garden out, plant them in the bottom there and they will just spill forth and they will flower much better. The other thing they'll do is they'll climb up into the hedge, and so you'll get flowers that sort of 2, 3, 4 feet tall, and they surprise you. It's lovely. It's lovely. It's just thinking about how they grow, because they produce these long wands of shoots and then the shoot touches the ground and it roots and so on. So it's like a chain reaction. It's go doing, 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 doing.
And if you plant it up, if you have like a raised bed, it will cascade over like a curtain as well. So that's very lovely. Yeah. Going back to I didn't even notice them to begin with, but you sent me a photo possibly of Salvia Royal Bumble, a red flower anyway, and behind it was what I thought was a kind of steeper, until you pointed out that they were clematis seed heads, this big mountain of those lovely fuzzy cousin it type little seed heads bubbling away in the background. Absolutely sensational.
Well, we think it's a form of clematis orientalis, but we're not sure. But it was on a nurseryman's a kind of vague nurseryman's seed list, plant list, I mean, and it was one that he'd grown from seed that he'd collected on an expedition somewhere in probably China or somewhere like that. And it didn't really have a name. And so I thought, well, I've got to try this and see what it does. And it's now got to be a considerable size. And I think it needs to be a considerable size. And it's the kind of plant that when it's in flower, people stop and look at it and they're perplexed, because it doesn't have the yellow or orange lanterns, like orange peel lanterns, that the orientalis you would expect to have. It has kind of much smaller little yellow flowers, and there's yellow and lemon and lime green in them. And so it's kind of a subtle thing, but they're on such a huge mass, such a scale that it causes consternation. And you can see people sort of scratching their heads and all the rest of it, looking at this in deep puzzlement. And I think this is the best year it's ever been. And I think possibly maybe it like the sun that we had last year, which a lot of plants are repaying us for that. And you know, it's just a novelty. I think it's one that needs. I better get my cutting gear out, I think, and try a few cuttings of that, because I don't know where you get it again.
No, well, exactly. You need more of it just in case, because it's fantastic, a real stunner. And it's planted alongside a salvia, as I said, and with our balmy ends to our autumn. So it's been crazily hot in October. Obviously, the salvias have been doing so well at East Ruston, well, everywhere, but I always associate late season salvias with East Ruston Old Vicarage, and you've got a number of really fabulous ones which seem to be having a wonderful summer and autumn.
Yes, we're officially now into autumn, so we can say that. But yes, they do. As long as the weather remains open, they love to have this long growing season. And, you know, so much for gardens finishing at the end of August kind of thing. Forget it. I mean, that's an absolute load of ridiculous nonsense. But people are always telling me that you have so much colour in the garden here. And it's not that we necessarily plan for that colour, although to an extent, I suppose we probably do subconsciously, but it's the fact that you want the garden to keep going. You don't want it to stop. So you're and I'm a compulsive propagator. So I've always got plants to put out. And I mean, Ian, when he's here, and he's here today, when he's here, he often says to me, have you got any plants you want using up somewhere? And I said, yes. He said, well, tell me where they are. And when he goes off and does some weeding somewhere, he'll plonk these in. And of course, they're the kind of, these be salvias, shall we say, and they're the kind of salvias that I've grown from cuttings probably taken in April, and they'll be making lovely bushy plants, and bang, they come straight into flower. And so it is remarkable. And I mean, salvias today, the number of salvias today that are hardy that didn't used to be, I think, is phenomenal. Now, that doesn't go for everybody, because lots of people suffered with -10, -12 last year. During the winter, and we didn't. We had -4 for one night only, and I mean, it was lower than -4 on other nights. But I mean, you know, the amount of plants that came through was absolutely amazing. And you know, plants always surprise you. I've just thought of something. We haven't discussed this. I have a climbing Alstroemeria called it's called Bomarea acutifolia, and it's FM140 collection number on it. It came from Pan Global Plants. I sowed seed of it last year, and my seedlings actually came up and they developed, and they're now flowering. I didn't know this because until I discovered the other day, grubbling about behind some sheds, you know, one of those sort of murky areas you don't go to very often, and you look at it and you think, oh, that's where those boxes went to. There's the canes I was looking for. And there on the ground was a sun Bomaria with a flower on it. Now, Bomarias come from South America. They're not altogether reliably hardy, but this plant has got to be a self-sown or probably a bird-sown seedling, I would think, because it's beneath some holly trees, and it's been there through that cold winter, and it germinated, and it had a flower on the end of its trailing stem. They climb. So they're the kind of things you can grow through shrubs and things like that. But a very neglected race of plants, I think. And I think in future years we'll probably be growing more of them.
Certainly, you always used to have a Bomaria, sort of where you would duck off to go into your patio, kitchen sort of patio area, and people would just stop on the path. What is this glorious plant? And you're right, just not really known, but the kind of plant you cannot walk past without stopping. Almost every visitor to East Ruston Old Vicarage have a photo of that particular plant. They probably don't even know what it is, because if you're not around to identify it, they may walk away and never ever know unless they're listening to this.
There is a label on it, so that, I mean, they can look it up.
Oh, aren't you good? And no one's walked off with the label.
Well, no, some people do. I mean, I have to say that it's easier to put the label in your pocket than to make a note, isn't it?
Yeah. Thank goodness for smartphones, hey? I mean, my phone is just full of plant names, labels, and then the plant itself. And you probably know this if you're listening or watching, but if you've got something like Google Photos, if you write a name in and you've taken a photo of the label, it will take you to that label, so you can kind of look at that plant again if you want to find it. I do a lot of that for this podcast, as you can imagine. You mentioned climbing Alstroemeria. Of course, your garden's full of normal Alstroemerias. I'm sure they're looking as fabulous as ever. Yes, they are. I mean, people know this probably by now, but I'm going to say it again. You don't cut Alstroemerias, you pull them like you pull a piece of rhubarb, because that, by pulling the flowering shoot away from the rhizome beneath the ground, that spurs the rhizome to grow a little bit further to make another flowering stem, because it thinks, hello, something's gone wrong. I've got to make another flowering stem to make more seed to produce another generation, because that's the thinking behind it. It's also extremely satisfying. Yes, it is. I don't know why. There's just something so pleasing about it. It's like pulling feathers out of a feather pillow or something, like when you feel the little spiky bit. And I just love to pull a feather out of a feather pillow. I don't know if I'm strange. But
I thought you were going to say it's like plucking a chicken.
Plucked a chicken yet. Still on the list. Of things to do. Moving on.
I've lived long enough, and I've plucked many a chicken, I'll tell you.
Now, climbing plants, I've hardly ticked off anything on our list of things we want to talk about. There are so many things.
There'll be other days.
I've got passion flowers, Thunbergias, Ipomoea lobata, hops, all of these climbers, which I know are just looking so abundant in your garden at the moment.
Well, they are, you see. And I mean, I think one of the things that, as we've gardened over the years, we've become much, much less dependent. In fact, I don't think we're dependent on pesticides at all anymore. So we endeavour to be as organic as you possibly can. But I don't necessarily like that word, but I like to think that we garden with nature instead of rather gardening against nature. And I think the great thing is, I mean, it's easier probably for me because I've got the space, but I think if you can build up enough habitat, and I mean, the amount of ladybirds there was around the garden yesterday, I mean, it's just crazy. And they're the goodies and all the rest of it. But you've got to have the baddies to have the goodies, and you've got to have the goodies to have the baddies, if you see what I mean.
So it's
all a matter. It's all a matter of balance. But it occurred to me the other day that the balance is never the same 2 years running. And I suddenly thought, isn't that lovely? It's wonderfully satisfactory, because, sometimes you're going to get wonderful roses and sometimes you get wonderful Alstroemerias or whatever. And, it's just the balance between the thing. It changes from year to year, but it's lovely to think that you do actually garden with nature rather than garden against nature.
Oh, absolutely. And in a garden like yours, I'm sure it's absolutely necessary, because you've got 32 acres. You couldn't, even if you wanted to, you couldn't be kind of bashing everything over the head with a chemical.
No, you couldn't. I mean, somebody said to me the other day, what's the matter with your betula, Utilis jackmontii? And I said, it's got rust. And they said, oh, isn't it a pity you won't get any of the lovely golden leaves? And I said, well, it's just something you have to put up with, because I can't get up there and spray it with fungicide, can I? Don't be stupid. It's one of those things. You live with it. If I don't get it, I can go and look at it in somebody else's garden. But hey-ho.
If you ever get time to step outside of yours.
Oh, that's true.
One thing we must mention before we run out of time, there was a fabulous plant. I do love it on this podcast when we touch base on plants that I don't think we've talked about before, and I don't think we've ever mentioned this particular acanthus. Forgive me if we have, but prickly old thing, but really stunning.
Oh, senii. Acanthus senii, yes. I mean, well, this is a strange thing because there are two particularly keen plant people that come to the garden, and on both occasions this year they said, "Did you lose your Acanthus senii?" It's a talking point that we have between us, you know. And I said, "No." I said, "It's shooting. I bet it won't flower." Well, you see the proof of it today. It is flowering. It always flowers very late. It comes from Ethiopia. It has a very, very prickly leaf. And I think if you think about the landscape in Ethiopia, it's fairly barren, and you get lots of goats and things nibbling things. So those very thorny leaves, very prickly leaves, they've evolved so that the goats don't eat them, and it gives the plant a chance to grow. It's a shrubby plant. It's a perennial. Sometimes it dies right back to ground level, which it did last year, and in a mild winter it won't. And I thought a year before last, I thought, I've only got one plant of this. I ought to take some cuttings. So I did take some cuttings. I got my hands were mutilated doing it because it's such a thorny thing. But a pair of gloves, a long pair of snips, you know, to get the bottom leaves off and cut the others in half and all the rest of it. And I prepared a little tray of cuttings, and they did take. So I've now got more of it. And it's just a nice thing to try in odd places. Yeah, especially if you've got dry air.
I mean, it does look quite vicious. So perhaps, you know, not in my front garden right next to the pavement where passers-by might accidentally snare themselves on it. But it's really fantastic. And another plant that I completely misnamed when I saw the photo of it, and I don't think we've ever mentioned on the podcast, is Rostranuncula.
No, I don't think we have, in actual fact. Well, it's a relatively unknown plant. I don't think it's rare. It's just not used very much, but it has these lovely sort of hanging tassels, like hanging hairy caterpillars, really, in sort of mauve and pink with a little bit of cream on the end of the stamens and things. It's just a very attractive plant. I was very lucky to go to the garden of John Simmons. John Simmons used to work at Kew, and he's a very very knowledgeable tree person, and a very generous man, I have to say. And he took us to see his Rostranuncula and said, "I bet you haven't got one of these." And I said, "Well, I have actually," but I daren't tell him. But I dare not tell him that mine was 3 times as large as his. I didn't do, but it was. And I've now got it in a couple of places, and sometimes it's a strange plant because sometimes if it gets too dry, it will drop all its leaves and you know, it doesn't like you. But with a bit of good cultivation, it's lovely. I've got it growing in the front courtyard here behind a fuchsia called Deltacera, which is cream and purple skirt. And it just looks lovely with that. And Deltacera, you see, is a fuchsia, hardy fuchsia. I think it's one of the less hardy fuchsias. But last year, I just tipped it. I took the top growth off it as we approached cold weather and left the stems, and it shot all the way up, and I left them. Now, the great thing about fuchsias is, and lots of other plants as well, suffer from the unwanted attentions of the capsid bug. Daturas brugmantias, they have it, and the capsid bug gets into the tips of the shoots, and it nibbles away at the emergent leaves, and it eats the flower buds. So of course you don't get any flower. But capsid bugs, they finish their life cycle about the end of August. Thereafter, the plant makes new shoots and it flowers its head off. And this is what's happening to Deltacera. We had no flowers early on fuchsia Deltacera, but later on, I mean, it's just awash with flowers, and it looks absolutely splendid. So, you know, let's keep the winter away for a little bit longer, shall we? I mean, I know we're supposed to get into colder weather this week. Don't mention it.
I'm hanging on to, because my allotment started late. You know, I didn't sow a lot of things until quite late, though it's been amazing to see what has done well. You know, late sowings of things like Orlia grandiflora have turned into wonderful plants. Zinnias, obviously, you know, I always try and sow them too early anyway, so they have done really well. And I cannot get enough, gone over a little bit now, but this little green vase packed with green Bennery's giant lime, so green zinnias, bright blue cornflowers, and then a pink dahlia, ball dahlia I grew called Pulventum Christabel, which has, it's sort of pink with gold tips to the petals. So you just get that real, almost childlike kind of candy look of the pinks, the blues, the greens, and it's not sophisticated in any way, but it makes me so happy. And I just want my allotment to carry on producing these flowers so I can keep making little posies.
It's not sophisticated, but it's nature.
Yeah.
And nature is so lovely. I mean, you know, you just gotta look. And I mean, even if wild areas, we've got several wild areas, much to the chagrin of some of our visitors, I have to say. But I've already said the reason is because we are wildlife friendly, insect friendly, and to some extent pest friendly, because you have to be both. And you know, there's some of those wild areas where you get some lady's bedstraw coming up next to a lady's bedstraw with its lovely yellow flowers, and you get it next to I can't think of the name of them now, but the pink trumpet sort of flowers. They're wildflowers, malva.
Malva,
those
yeah.
wide open flared.
Mm.
Yes, and I mean, you know, pink and yellow, it shouldn't go together. Shut up.
Nature combines pink and yellow so well. It's I always think this, I've mentioned before, Hills and Holes in Barnack, one of the wild flower hotspots I love to go to. Every year I mean to go at pulsatilla time to see the Pask flowers. Never ever seen them, always time at, you know, too early or too late, but the orchids there are wonderful, and they have lots of ladies' bedstraw, and you always see it in combination with either orchids or other pink wildflowers, and it just works so well.
Exactly. I mean, nature raw in tooth and claw is really quite wonderful, you know.
Oh, it really is. Other things that are wonderful, I can't believe this is a year where I've not seen your brugmansias at their sort of peak.
Oh, well, yeah.
I'm imagining they're looking quite resplendent as ever.
Well, they are, and I have to say that they're just coming up to what will probably be their last big flush of flowers, but much depends on the weather, because if the weather remains open and fairly kind, they will do another one. But I mean, I always think to, you know, get to the middle of October-ish, we're nearly into the middle of October, and I think, you know, don't expect too much of them, but I will hope for a further flush, and we'll see what happens. But I mean, they're resplendent at the moment. They've got literally hundreds of flowers on each of those huge bushes, and they just grow from strength to strength. Let's hope it doesn't end too soon.
And tell me, what are they underplanted with this year? Because the container planting at East Ruston is something I normally pour over all of your wonderful combinations. So what's sitting there at the feet of the brugmansias and helping them to shine?
Well, at the feet of the brugmansias, I've had Ageratum petiolatum for years and years and years, and I have to say, you can grow it from seed. And it's the one plant, I grow it from cuttings. It's the one plant I would never be without, because it sits underneath the brugmansias together with Argyranthemum Jamaica primrose. And what else have I got in there? I've got some silver centaurea, wonderful cascading silver plants. All of my plantings underneath the brugmansias, they started off with blue and yellow petunias. Well, forget them, because they're everything else has grown over them. They were lovely for the first couple of months, you know, June and July. Get to the end of July, everything starts to change, and the other plants grow up and grow big. So it's basically blue and lemon yellow that I put underneath them this year. And also in front of the library, I actually have two brugmansias on the top of the steps there. And for the first time, I have used marigold jester. It's a tagetes, and it's a jester. It's a single flower, and the petals are striped mahogany brown and yellow. And I've used them there, and they've just grown so tall. Elsewhere, we've grown tagetes dixter, and tagetes dixter is 5 feet tall. It doesn't ever tell you it grows that big, but I mean, it does. And it's fantastic. And the interesting thing is, we have some volunteers in the garden, and they come in and they do things like deadheading and stuff like that. Now, I always save my own seed from tagetes. There wasn't a single seed pod on tagetes tagetes jester anywhere in the garden, thanks to the diligence of the volunteers who've been snipping away. So I've now got to put a couple of pots in a secret place so that I can let the seed ripen, so that I actually get some.
Yeah, talking of satisfying things and seed pods, I've been having a lot of fun. my sort of beans I left to dry for keeping weren't quite as plentiful as I'd have liked, particularly yin yang, that wonderful black and white bean that Wrecker Mystery put us onto.
Yeah.
I didn't have that many of them anyway, and I left them to dry, and obviously they got eaten. So I've got literally about 8. Probably a bit of an exaggeration, but not very many. But it's so satisfying shelling out dried beans. And so I've been having fun doing that in a spare moment.
A little tip: if you're shelling dried beans and you're going to keep them for use, I mean, to eat during the winter, before you put them into their final jars, put them in the freezer for about a week, because just in case you've got any nasty little things living in there, it will put them to sleep.
That is a fantastic idea. Now we have got loads more things we could talk about, but time is of the essence. There's probably a crying baby about to appear. So I don't know if you have any FLOMO to share, but from the long list of things that we haven't managed to fit in, I think the one I would like to mention, which we have mentioned before, but not for a little while, is Clematis rederiana, or redriana, however you say it.
Yeah,
which
Hadrian.
is such a beautiful, subtle, unusual, classy kind of plant, and the photo you sent to me is just looking lovely at East Ruston at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, lots of it has gone over. It's been flowering for such a long time, and there is another clematis. It's a Viticella, a dark purple Viticella growing through it.
Oh.
But where the Viticellas are flowering, the other one has died. The flowers have died. So I only got the flowers of the cowslip, the cowslip scented clematis, which is lovely. I think it's, again, you see, this is lateness. It's a vigorous plant. I mean, you could grow this into a tree if you want to. And the great thing is that if you're growing it in a small garden, you can cut away the whole top of it in the spring and you dispense with it. I mean, cut it up and put it, would dispense with it however you get rid of things. You can put it on the compost heap if you can chop it fine enough, but that's a bit of a problem, a bit of a pain to do that. But it's just one of those things that is so worthwhile having. And, you think, oh, I've got Clematis rederiana. Doesn't it look lovely? Isn't it? Just pick some and put it on your breakfast table, because the scent from it will waft towards you, and it's the scent of cowslips almost. It's amazing. Lots of things like this. Did you know that nasturtiums are scented?
Actually, I've not got down to this one.
Well, there you are, you see. But I remember, I went to stay with somebody many, many years ago, and there on the bedside table was a little posy of nasturtiums. And I just looked at them and thought, well, that's very thoughtful and very pretty, and, nice things to do for your guests when they arrive. And I was snuggling down into bed, and I thought, what is that smell, that scent? And it was the nasturtiums. I put my nose into them, and there you are. The other thing I've been doing this week, I didn't mean to tell you this earlier. You see these?
Oh,
they are dried rose petals.
Oh.
And I've actually been, there you are, and I've been drying rose petals. There's only one rose in this garden that dries to that shade. If you want to try drying roses, just pick the heads off a full rose just before it's about to drop its petals, spread them thinly on a tray and put them somewhere warm. I put them near the Arga, which is always very warm. So they dry for me in a day and a half. But I mean, you might need to take a week to dry them. But experiment with your colours. These roses that I've dried are what you call a good mid-pink. It's a Delbard rose, and Delbard was a French breeder. I don't know the name of it, but it's a climbing rose. But the thing about it is, those petals dry to this wonderful colour. I tried drying the petals on Colombian climber. They just go brown. No good at all. So if you want to make your own potpourri and be frightfully posh, there you are.
If you want to be frightfully posh, like
get drying rose.
Well, we are packed out with ideas, and we have basically run clean out of time because the baby's just arrived back from his walk. One thing I must say, because I can't believe it's actually at peak while we're recording a podcast, my Escianthus Black Pagoda managed to sneak some absolutely wonderful flowers. And it's I need to trim it back and make it less scraggly, but I suddenly looked and realized these fabulous, they are lime at the base trumpet, lime to yellow to sort of deep mustardy yellow to orange to scarlet. So absolutely glorious. It reminds me of, I don't know, a fruit pastel lolly or something, but smarter. And then just glorious, glorious plant. And I mean, I grew it for the leaves because you can see they're very smart. But those flowers, what a treat on a house plant. I don't have very many flowering house plants, so
absolutely.
I wanted to share and show that off before.
Wonderful, well done.
Didn't do anything to deserve it. It's had horrible neglect since the baby was born, so I'm glad it's doing it anyway. Thank you, Alan. I think over the autumn and winter we should keep reconvening for these sort of star plants at East Ruston, because we all need inspiration as we head into the darker months for how to make our gardens beautiful places that we want to spend time in.
I think it's also nice to be able to share with people the news and things that we probably hear that they don't sometimes, about new plants, new bulbs. Remind me for our next podcast to talk about Hyacinth Gloria Mundi.
Ooh. Right, I'll write a big note. I'll set a reminder in my phone. There is every chance that our next podcast won't be next week. We've had a little bit of lurgy behind the scenes in both camps of Talking Dirty, which has ground our production wheels slightly to a halt. So fingers crossed, there may only be 1 week off, and then we'll get back to it now that we're fighting fit again. Colds last a damn long time. Luckily the baby only had it for a couple of days, but I seem to have had 2 weeks of snot and snivelling, so I'm glad to finally be out of that.
Well, I have to say, you look very bonny on it.
It's amazing what sleep deprivation can do for you, but there's certainly plenty more to come on Talking Dirty. So thank you for joining us for this East Ruston special, and long may these East Ruston specials continue through the darker months. But until next time, happy gardening, everybody.
Happy gardening, everybody. Bye-bye.
Oh, that connected much quicker.
No, it didn't. It took for ages.
Hello and welcome to a special October. I haven't really thought this through, have I? Right. What am I going to call it?
Best.
Right, here we go.
A climb. Oh. Can I ring you back? I'm in the middle of a podcast. Bye. I'll start that bit again.
Yeah. I think the plant in front.
Well, I think it's probably.
I think the plant in front is the Zauschneria, but the plant behind, that chocolatey thing.
It is. That's a carokia.
Ah.
I'm sure that's a carokia.
Well,
where did you get that photograph from?
You.
Did I send it?
Yes.
Oh, well, I'll have a look on my. Hold on a minute. Let me have a look through my screen.
Yeah.
Where did that photograph come from? You!
Like that.